What's the term? Hey y'all, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today. And for this video, we are going to be doing my surprises and disappointments of 2024. Alright, so before we get into anything bookish, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below, as well as tell me in the comments what was a book that really caught you off guard with how much you loved it this year. Thankfully, I actually had a good few of those. I also unfortunately had a good few books that disappointed me. End of series was not a strong suit for me this year, apparently, looking at this list. First, I want to go ahead and dive in with the surprises, with the positive ones, starting at the top with one that I read for my fairy tale 5x5 earlier this year, and I'm still pretty shocked that this got as high a rating from me as it did because it was a dystopian novel. Those don't usually work for me. It was The Girl in Red by 𝗖cieः𝘁𝘁. Now, I did have slightly positive expectations going into this because I've read prior work from Henry in the past and I did really enjoy it. On top of that, I do like the fact that she does fairy tale stories and then gives them this horror twist. So with The Girl in Red, it is a dystopian story that is a retelling of Little Red Riding Hood, where we're following Red, our main character, who is traversing by herself through this barren wasteland to try and reach her grandmother's house because she believes it is a great location to get away from everything that's going on. But unfortunately, along the way, we get to see as she interacts with many different wolves. This kind of reads like a zombie story, but it's also not quite zombies. However, one way or another, I am still shocked that I enjoyed it as much as I did. This had a back and forth timeline where we get to see before Red is by herself, whenever things are leading up to her family escaping their home and trying to make their way to their grandmother's house. And then we see an afterword of when Red is completely alone. I do believe one of the biggest reasons I ended up enjoying this book as much as I did is because of the character work around Red. I really liked the fact that in the before timeline, she is like the doomsday prepper. She's the one who has seen all of these different horror and sci-fi movies, so she knows what could go on. She is prepared for the worst case scenario. And even though her family isn't necessarily listening to her, she is still planning everything out that she can to help them all survive. But I also liked that the further into the book we got and the more we learned about Red and the more we saw, like, she isn't necessarily this good person, but I also just grew so attached to her that I had to root for her to make it through. I had to root for her to reach her grandmother's house. Another element of the story that I did think was pretty cool was the fact that Red is actually a, I believe, over-the-knee amputee. So that was an additional element to her survival that was something I'd never really considered in a dystopian story before, and I can also say I've never really seen in a dystopian story. So not only was that good representation on Henry's part, but it was also an interesting perspective to look at with this sort of a setting. But between this one and Hell Followed With Us the year prior, I'm starting to wonder if maybe I just need this like really amped up, horrific kind of zombie dystopian society. I've never been a big zombie fan, but off of these two books, maybe I should actually check out other zombie novels. On a pretty different note, another book that I ended up picking up this year, kind of totally random, was The Boy in the Red Dress by Christina Lambert. And I actually ended up really enjoying this one, even though I'd never heard anybody actually talk about this. I'm pretty sure I've seen people have it on their TBRs or perhaps haul it, but I've never seen anybody else review it. So this is a historical mystery story in which we're following this young woman who works at her aunt's, what's the term? Speakeasy. There we go. One night, this more affluent looking young lady comes in and she starts showing around photos of Marion, our main character's best friend, who also performs in drag at the club. And so she is very protective of Marion and tries to push this woman away, but unfortunately by the end of the night, this woman's body is found in the club's courtyard. And what with this woman showing pictures of Marion around just beforehand, of course he is prime suspect. So Millie ends up taking it upon herself to try and figure out what's going on, to try and clear her best friend's name, as well as, you know, clear out the bar for her aunt so they can get back in business. Like I said, I've just never heard anybody else talk about this one, so I didn't really go in with many expectations, but I actually really enjoyed it. It kind of scratched the same itch as like The Diviners, but minus the paranormal element. I'm still shocked by the fact that this had a bisexual love triangle that didn't annoy me. I tend to really hate love triangles, but this one wasn't too bad. I actually appreciated how the author ended up handling it. I don't remember what the context was that made me pick this book up, whether it was my TBR jar or an external TBR I was partaking in. Whatever it was though, I'm glad for it because I really enjoyed this. Next was a book that I believe I read because of my TBR jar. I also didn't really have many expectations going into this one because I hadn't heard people talk about it, but my cousin gave it to me for Christmas, I think last year. And again, I was really surprised at how much I enjoyed this one. Light from Uncommon Stars by 𝗖cieः𝘁𝘁. So this one's a little complicated when it comes to the plot because there's a lot going on. But so we start out following this demon who was once a violin prodigy and is now having to make deals with other violin prodigies for their souls. And I think once she hits 7, she will earn her freedom. She ends up meeting this young transgender girl who has recently ran away from home, but is also an expert at the violin. And though she is gearing up to make a deal with this woman, she first has to kind of turn her into a success before officially making said deal. However, unfortunately for Shizuka, she ends up becoming quite attached to Katrina. At the same time though, there's also this donut shop that is being run by this woman, Lynn, who is actually an alien. And she is just trying to give her family a normal life while at the same time repairing their spaceship. But Shizuka ends up coming into their donut shop and Len gets a little bit of a crush. It was a weird time. Like, this is one of those books where the plot is a little convoluted. It's really all over the place. I actually do have a few issues with certain aspects of the story, but I grew to care about every single one of the characters and the little found family that they create so much that by the end of this book, I only had positive things to say about it. Like I said, it was a weird time, but I really enjoyed it. I actually would be willing to reread this and kind of go through and annotate it. Again, the found family in here was just so freaking cute. It was adorable. Next up, I read Sisters of the Lost Nation by Nick Medina as a part of my Mythology Retellings 5x5. I was interested in this one because I knew it had basis in different indigenous mythologies, and then it had a horror spin on the story. So I was really intrigued. Though when I ended up picking it up, I just was having a very hard time with the first half of this book. I think it really came down to this back and forth timeline where we're watching our main character, Anna, who is very much an outcast in not just her town and her high school, but also even in her tribe, and she's really just trying to find a place for herself. Unfortunately though, her younger sister ends up disappearing, and Anna is doing everything she can to try and figure out what happened to her. Along with it being a horror book, it also tackled really heavy topics, so I very much wanted to enjoy the story. But this back and forth timeline that the author did in the first half made it really difficult for me to connect with the story and with Anna. So I think when I did my halfway update in that video, I guesstimated this would be about a 3-star, but I was really shocked that once the back and forth timeline element was removed in the latter half of the book, I was engrossed. I read it so fast and I became so enthralled with Anna's story, seeing the development of her character and figuring out her own identity while at the same time continuing the investigation into what happened to her sister and also to some of the other women from her reservation. Off of what was going on in the first half, I did not expect it to be such a high rating in the second half, but it really stuck the landing and I ended up liking it so much. A lot of the times with those videos when I have my estimated rating at the halfway point, I tend to be right about the actual rating. But with this one, no, the rating definitely improved and I'm going to be checking out more from this author in the future. This next one was also read for a 5x5. I didn't realize how many surprises I had in my 5x5 videos. Next up was Black Witch Magic by Mila Nix, which I read as a part of my witchy romance video in October. This was another one where I was surprised at how much I enjoyed it, seeing as how I never heard anybody talk about this, but it is following this young woman who lives in a small town and she is very much an outcast because she is a witch and also because there is this long-standing rumor about her family that her mother was an evil witch who did something to the man that she was in love with. When a similar situation starts happening with another man in this town that our main character actually went on a date with, she ends up kind of being forced into figuring out what's going on, but along the way ends up meeting this charming paranormal investigator who is actually the skeptic in his team, and the two of them end up getting a lot closer. This was super freaking cute. It's actually the first in a series in which we're following the couple, and I imagine every book is going to be like the next step in their relationship and also another mystery. Honestly, this series is the one that is making me consider getting Kindle Unlimited. That's a task. That's something. It was really cute. Again, I can't believe I've never heard anybody else talk about the series because I had a really fun time with the main character, with the mystery, with the romance. It was adorable. So much fun. Another romance video that I did that very, very much surprised me was my historical romance video, where I tried out this subgenre that I've been terrified of for a really long time. And the book that really hit it out of the park was Forever Her Bachelor by Cecilia Renee. Oh my gosh. I do think this book came down to the character creation of both the male and female lead, but also the pining and the number of tropes that were interwoven into the story that just somehow worked so perfectly. This is a second chance romance between neighbors who were childhood friends, and once upon a time they had actually been engaged for convenience sake, kind of imploding, and they hadn't spoken for about 15 years. Now though, our female main character is unfortunately about to be married off to a terrible man, and our male main character has learned that if he is not married by, I think, like 35, he will lose his inheritance. So they are both the perfect solution to one another's problems, but all of the drama of their past is still in the way and still putting up roadblocks in their relationship. I had so much fun with this one. It was a spicy good time. The unpacking of familial trauma in it was really well handled. The pining, oh my god, the pining in this book was so good. I cannot freaking wait to read the prior books in this series. And then when I met this author at an event, she told me that the next book in the series is going to be between two characters we met in Forever Her Bachelor, and I'm so excited for that. Oh, I probably should have put this one after Black Witch Magic because they kind of pair together perfectly. But next is Hot Hex Boyfriend by Carly Bloom. I was lucky enough to receive an arc of this from Forever Publishing, so shout out to them because I had such a good time with this. I said in my new author audit, and I'll say it again, this is Sabrina the Teenage Witch, the 90s version, mixed with Dial A for Aunties. It's so fun, it's so silly, it is so cute. So in this one we have Delia, who is in a family of only women, and all of them believe that they are witches. They've descended from witches. They're very kooky, they're very strange, they're kind of just accepted as the weirdos of the town, and Delia's just learned to deal with this. Unfortunately, at the start of this book, their next door neighbor has recently passed, and his grandson has moved to town in order to take care of all his affairs. Turns out Max is actually a witch, and it turns out the Merryweather women are as well, but his family put a curse on her family to remove their ability. But of course, something ends up happening and that curse is revoked, and the ridiculous shenanigans that ensue is so much fun. There is also a shape-shifting cat in this, Nikki. I love him. There were just so many really fun, cute moments in this story. I had a phenomenal time reading it. It is very much a go-to, turn your brain off, have a fun time rom-com. I cannot stop saying enough positive things about it, and I'm gonna keep talking about it every October, I bet. Okay, so that's it for my surprises. Let's get into the less positive ones with my disappointments. So starting at the top was actually a book from my Star Wars canon project. I've been working through reading all of the canon Star Wars novels this year. I'll put a link to my playlist up above. The first one that really let me down was Light of the Jedi, which is the start of, technically it was constituted phase 1, but I'm gonna say phase 2 because I've been going through chronologically. Unfortunately, I think the introduction to this little series in itself, and then also this section, was very much a letdown. I think they started with too broad a cast of characters, and they really should have narrowed it down at the start so we could have had some time to kind of get to know everybody and understand these before we start adding more people in. I think even with that first one, we already had I'm gonna say 8 different main perspectives we were following, and then with the very drastically different plots that were going on in each of those perspectives, it felt very segmented. I've actually caught up for the time being, and I did end up enjoying many other books in this portion, but was not the glowing start that I was really hoping for. Also, please excuse the lighting. Obviously, the sun has been moving since I've been filming, and I didn't feel like getting out my light today. On the opposite note, for the next one, this was the end of a series, and unfortunately, I didn't love it. This was the finale in the Angel of Indian Lake series by Stephen Graham Jones, and it's very interesting that this one is on the disappointments when the second book in the series was on my surprises for last year. I definitely think the second book of the series was the highlight for me. The first one felt a little bit too slow, and then the third one felt like it had too much going on. It was going too fast, whereas the second, I think, actually managed to balance between those two very well. In this series, we were following Jade Daniels. She starts as a teenager who is obsessed with slasher movies, and then we kind of see as she watches different slashers take place in her town, or at least she believes to be slashers. As I said, I felt like this had too many things going on. There are too many horror tropes. There was too many big bads, crazy twists that took place. It was just one after another after another after another. There was no breathing room at the end. I did actually really enjoy the finale when it came to what happened with the characters. I liked the growth we saw from Jennifer by the end of it, but my entire experience with reading the third book was overall a letdown, and I'm still really bummed about that. And honestly, kind of the same thing for the finale of the Bear and the Nightingale series by Catherine Arden. I really liked the first book. It gave me that whimsical fairy tale feeling I went in wanting. I liked the second book as well. I thought we got to see even more of the amazing female character we were following, Vasya. The third book, though, I think fell down due to plotting. It seemed like the author wanted to do this fantastical magic war while also having this important Russian historical event involved. So whenever the Russian historical event happened, I felt like that was the finale. I thought the book was over. And then I remember looking down at the audiobook and I still had like 5 hours left, and I just didn't understand how there was more to happen. Then there was the mythological, fantastical aspect, and it just felt so separate. I think the author should have like more interwoven those two. I also was not a big fan of the romance that ended up happening in this series. So for the first 2 books, this was a really solid 4-star series, but this last one, it ended on a lower note. And I think I gave it like 3.5 because I still loved 𝗖cie and I really loved the feel of this world overall, but the plot in this one just let me down. Kind of similar is the next book, 𝗖cie Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. I read this for my second chance, actually third chance for that one. Reading vlogs, I'll put a link to that in the cards. This one ended up falling down for me because I knew it was a historical story going into it, but I was marketed a historical fantasy. The fantasy elements were so freaking light. They really weren't even integral to what was going on in the story. And then the war that was going on got really bogged down by all of these politics and planning and things like that just I didn't care to read. I liked both the main characters and I liked the themes that were being explored in each of them. This just didn't really wow me like I was hoping for. Did not live up to the expectations I'd set in my head, unfortunately. Another book that I had read that I had heard, I don't know if I want to say hype, but I'd heard a lot about it at this time that I read it, and that was This Wretched Valley by Jenny Kiefer. I think it got a lot of attention because it was sort of reminiscent to, I want to say it's like the Tolvian Pass incident, but we're following this group of hikers who go into the wilderness to kind of trek this section and, you know, make their names and put their labels on this cliff that they're like rock climbing on. This one fell down because I hated all of the main characters. Well, okay, I didn't feel very strong about any of the main characters. I wasn't rooting for any of them. And in a horror story, like, that can work. You can give us all detestable characters and just kind of watch everything play out. But I also didn't particularly care about watching everything play out. I think there was like one particularly good gory scene that I remember. Other than that, this was actually very forgettable. Some of the twists that it felt like the author was trying to do with the story just didn't really work in my opinion. And I didn't really care for them. It was just kind of like oh, that happened. Honestly, I'm gonna say this one was a disappointment mostly because I really liked the cover. It's always really hopeful that I would enjoy this one, especially because it stood out apart from other horror books I had been reading as of late. And turned out that wasn't really a good thing. Another series that ended on a disappointing note for me this year was the Children of 𝗖cie series, which finally closed out with Children of Anguish and Anarchy. I loved the first book in this series. It was one of those that got me back into reading. It was one of the books I had read relatively recently to when I started booktube. And then I definitely think the love of the first book kind of kept me pushing in the second and really kept me engaged with it and probably bumped my rating a bit. But after I had some time away from it, I could see issues. And then we came to this third book. I was so excited for this. I was really curious about how things were going to close out here off of everything that happened in the first two. This was not it. There was a really important character in the second book that is literally non-existent in this third one, which I still can't get past. Everything that happens in this third book starts and ends here, so it feels very separated from the first two books in the series. The characters that I've really gone on a roller coaster ride with, I didn't feel like they had a solid ending. I didn't feel like they had completed a full character arc by the end of this book. There was some reveals around certain characters, which were cool to see, but felt honestly half-baked. So bummed about it. This series is freaking beautiful. I love all of these covers and the artwork done on them, but with how this one went, I'm probably gonna unhaul them because looking at them just makes me sad. This next one was a disappointment, but there was a lot that happened in this book that I did actually really enjoy, and so I am going to keep it on my shelves for the time being because I did annotate a lot in it, and I think there were some really cool discussions going on here through this like horrific lens. And that's Woman Eating by Claire Coda. Our main character is a half vampire, and she is basically out on her own for the first time in her life and really having to survive by herself. And I really enjoyed the way this author wrote about eating disorders through the lens of vampirism. I thought that was so cool. I thought it was very original, and how those themes were woven into this character and the exploration of her were just so well done. My problem was it felt like this book was trying to do way too much, and it is pretty freaking short. There are so many themes that are going on here that unfortunately I felt like the ones I really cared about and were really carrying the story for me, time was taken away from those in order to talk about some of these other topics that I didn't really care for, and I didn't feel like were as well incorporated into the story. But there were still things I liked here. This just wasn't really the 5-star I was really hoping for, seeing as how I tend to really enjoy looking at these sorts of topics. And then finally is this last one that I'm still heartbroken over, honestly, because the first 150 pages I loved. I've not stopped talking about the roller coaster that was this book since I finished it. What the River Knows by Isabel Ibanez. I loved the first 150 pages. This is very reminiscent to The Mummy and those sorts of movies, which are some of my all-time favorites, but the characters here definitely felt like they were influenced by Rick and Evie from that early 2000s classic. But once I officially hit the middle of this book, it really started dragging for me, and the characters I had really grown to care about just started to drop. The way the plot ended up working out was so ridiculous and so repetitive. In the final chapter, I really thought that the author was laying the groundwork for something I would very much enjoy in the second book, and then there's this final cliffhanger to close it out that tells me no, it's going to be more of the same in the second. And I'm so mad about it, because honestly, you should have seen me reading the first 150 pages of this book. I was having a phenomenal time. I was chuckling, I was giggling. I wasn't kicking my feet because I was on an airplane, but still, like, I was having a really good time. So when this started to go downhill, I got a lot of scrapes and bruises. I was getting really sad and really bummed, and I still am. So on that sad note, that is it for today, y'all. Thank you so much for coming to my channel. I really appreciate it. Make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, leave me the covered eyes emoji, because that's how I'm feeling looking at some of these disappointments. I have all my socials as well as a few ways you can support me linked in the description. I come out with videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye!